Okay, so we finished up with our discussion on the inorganic compounds. Now, let's take a look at the organic compounds. Organic materials, again, by definition, contain carbon, and there are four major ones. The first one we're going to talk about are the carbohydrates. Now, carbohydrates contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and that includes sugars and starches. So, whenever you think of a carbohydrate, just think of a sugar, as it's classified into several different groups. We have monosaccharides, which are simple sugars. We have disaccharides, which are two sugars put together. Good example of a disaccharide is sucrose, that's table sugar. A good example of a monosaccharide is glucose, which our bodies use for all sorts of energy. Uh, we have polysaccharides, which are long branching chains. In our bodies, we store glucose in a long chain called glycogen. In plants, they store these sugars in starches and so forth. Anyway, think of saccharide as in saccharin, as in sweet, as in sugar. Um, so carbohydrates, and they serve a variety of purposes. They can be structural in nature, particularly in plant life, and in humans they serve a purpose largely as an energy source. In fact, we convert everything that we eat to a simple sugar, glucose, which is then fed into our mechanism to get our ultimate energy exchange, which is ATP. Now, let's see. Here's an example of a simple sugar. It's a monosaccharide. You see it's got six carbons. Here's a double sugar, which is a disaccharide. This is a polysaccharide, which is a long branching chain. Some simple sugars are some of the disaccharides that we have. We can combine two simple sugars like glucose and fructose, and we end up getting sucrose. And again, we do this by adding or subtracting water. So if we want to put two monosaccharides together, we just take a water molecule out and we end up with this disaccharide. Now, that is a real short and simple explanation of carbohydrates. There was a video that you saw previously that goes into that in a little more detail. I want you to understand what the monomers are. That is, you've got a monosaccharide, which two of them together make a disaccharide. Understand that a carbohydrate has carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen as its chemical components. It is called a carbohydrate because you have one water molecule to every carbon molecule. So you have a carbon, two hydrogens, and an oxygen, H2O plus a carbon. Now, the next important organic compound is the lipids, and they also contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but they have it in different proportions than carbohydrates. The carbon and hydrogen outnumber the oxygen in this case, and this is insoluble in water. We've always heard oil and water doesn't mix, so lipids are insoluble. They do not dissolve in water, and one reason is that they are nonpolar, whereas water is a polar molecule. Remember, water will dissolve anything that is polar, like ionically bonded substances that have a charge on them. But if it doesn't have a charge, water doesn't act very well at dissolving. Now, some common lipids that are in the human body. We have neutral fats, which are triglycerides. These are found in fat deposits. They are composed of fatty acids and glycerol, and they're a great source of stored energy. See, lipids contain more than twice as much energy per gram as any other substances, proteins, carbohydrates, whatever. There's 4 calories per gram for a protein or a carbohydrate. For a lipid, there are 9. And so it is a great compact storage material. Not only is it a good source of stored energy, it also acts as padding. We have lipids that surround our kidneys. It acts as insulation. We prevents us from freezing, and many animals have large layers of fat or blubber. Now, this is a typical triglyceride. It has glycerol, and then it has these 3 fatty acid chains. Some other common lipids in the human body are the phospholipids. And phospholipids are neat. Phospholipids have phosphorus on one end and a lipid on the other end. Now, lipids hate water, so they don't mix, but phosphorus likes water, and as a result, it is what we call amphipathic. That is, it's got one side that likes water, one side that doesn't. Phospholipids make up a big portion of the cell membrane, actually about 60%, and I'll tell you a little bit more about phospholipids in a few minutes. Another common lipid in the human body are the steroids. And steroids are substances that are derived from cholesterol. So it includes cholesterol, bile salts, vitamin D is derived from bile salts, hormones, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone are based on the steroids. Now, this is a phospholipid. As you can see, we've got this phosphorus group. We've got these tails. So we've got a polar end and a non-polar tail. Now, what happens with this is that it forms a bilayer. And we'll look more at that when we get into the cell membrane. But basically, if you've ever watched old Western movies, someone gets into a bar fight, and the buddies back up to each other. That is, they have each other's back so that they are protecting one another. And phospholipids do exactly that. The part that hates water, that nonpolar tail, backs up to the nonpolar tail of another phospholipid, thus excluding water from in between them. You can take a whole bunch of phospholipids and put them in a jar full of water and shake them up, and what's going to happen is that it's going to form this little layer that actually forms into a sphere, a little tiny sphere about the size of a cell membrane. So it's pretty cool. Now, cholesterol is a large branching molecule. It's the basis for the steroid molecules in the body. It also serves as part of the cell membrane. The cholesterol stabilizes the structure of the cell just a little bit. Proteins are made of amino acids, and so that's the subunit of a protein. And proteins are different from carbohydrates and lipids in that they also contain nitrogen. They sometimes contain sulfur, other substances in small quantities, but the big thing is that they contain nitrogen. So amino acids have nitrogen. There's generalized structure to all amino acids, which is they have an amine group, amine meaning nitrogen. They have the same acid group, and then they have something that's called their radical group. And that radical group is what defines what kind of amino acid there is. And we have 20 some odd different amino acids that we make our proteins from. Now, proteins account for over half of the body's organic matter. Proteins do all sorts of things. They provide construction materials for body tissues in the form of different fibers. So we have collagen and elastin and fibrin and other substances, reticular fibers, all of which add structure And then we also have a role in cell function. They act as enzymes and hormones and antibodies. Now, these are different types of proteins. The linear proteins are very, very tough, the ones that make up the structural component, whereas the enzymes, hormones, and antibodies are very susceptible to being broken down. Now, you don't need to know the exact structure of an amino acid, but do understand that it has nitrogen and that we have a variation from our R groups between one amino acid and the other. Fibrous proteins, like we said, structural proteins appear in body structure. Examples include collagen and keratin. They are very stable. In fact, this is the stuff, if you barbecue ribs, you have to cook it low and slow for an extended period of time because there's a lot of connective tissue in there. That connective tissue has to break down, and it takes a long time to do so. Um, globular proteins, these are the functional proteins, and they function as antibodies or enzymes or any of a number of other things. But they can be denatured very easily. Now, when I talk about denaturing, what I'm talking about is that they lose their shape. Um, proteins are able to do certain things based on the shape that they have. If anybody has ever had braces, orthodontics, well, that wire was bent to a certain shape to move the teeth right into the exact position. And if it hadn't had that shape, it would not have done the job properly. By the same token, I have a key, and my key is cut just a certain way to give it a shape that allows it to fit in and do the job that it needs to. Now, if I took a hammer and I bashed it against my key, I would change the shape of my key and it would no longer work. It would be denatured. And these kinds of proteins can be denatured pretty easily. They are held together. Their shape is maintained by a very weak type of bond called a hydrogen bond. And we looked at those bonds back in the earlier part of chemistry. Those are the bonds that actually attract water molecules to one another. So they can be pretty weak. Examples of denaturing that you may be familiar with. If you cook an egg, when you first crack that egg open, it's runny and clear. It's got a yolk, but the other portion is clear. But you get that and it hits the skillet, and the skillet's hot, and those proteins unwind and stretch out, and it goes from being a translucent liquid material to being a a transparent white solid. And that's all because those proteins have unwound. Uh, this is an example of how these proteins could work. We have a certain shape, and we have a couple of places that bind, just so, onto some substance. But what we have are the key parts are located on different parts of the strand. The strand just happens to be folded just right to do this. Now, if we were to apply heat or acid or something else, then the protein unwinds and we no longer are able to function. We mentioned in chapter 1 homeostasis, and a big part of the reason that we need homeostatic mechanisms to keep our body temperature within the right range, to keep our pH within the right range, is because if we get outside of those ranges very much at all, we start denaturing proteins and we start affecting the way that our body can function. Now, before we jump into nucleic acids, I think this is a good stopping place for us. We'll pick up on nucleic acids in our next presentation. Thank you very much.